Ethan Ogilvie, and I'm going to be presenting information about a well-known hacker by the name of Albert Gonzalez, and he was a government official turned criminal mastermind. So who is Albert Gonzalez? Well, to begin, Albert Gonzalez, he's a talented hacker who grew up in Florida. And growing up, he always had a talent for cybersecurity, and he had even hacked NASA at just the age of 14 years old. And this would mark the start of his long, ill-fated journey within the cybersecurity industry. And so in his early 20s, he dropped out of college, but he was a frequenter of various cybersecurity forums across the internet. His reputation and connections eventually led him to become the leader within a prominent cybersecurity community, and that community was known as Shadow Crew. Shadow Crew, it was a prominent forum for cybersecurity criminals to exchange services or stolen information. And while he was on the rise momentarily within the Crew community, things were going pretty well, but they quickly turned against him. And so one day he was actually just out in the city at an ATM machine, and he was withdrawing money with stolen debit card information. And then the police showed up within the area. They were looking for an unrelated disturbance, but they saw him doing suspicious behavior, extracting money, and so they stopped him. And at the time, he was even wearing a woman's wig to help disguise himself. And so the police confronted, they arrested him, and then after being taken in, he was soon identified as a leader within the Shadow Crew community. And so in his early youth, he was faced with potentially super harsh punishments where he would spend a lot of his younger years in jail. And so he decided to cooperate with the government, turning in many individuals with whom he had worked with. And in the process, he became an informant for the Operation Firewall, which is a federal cybersecurity task force. And while he worked with the government, his true loyalties always remained with the black hat hacking community, which is the way he put it. And from working on the inside, he saw how things operated and how things worked within the government. This position and insight led to a temptation to return to his former ways not long after. So it's now the early 2000s, it's the dawn of the internet, and Albert Gonzalez, he noticed how networks across America were extremely vulnerable. This represented a wealth of new opportunities to Gonzalez, who started out with a technique known as war driving. War driving is the practice of physically driving around neighborhoods and businesses looking for unsecure networks. Techniques such as password cracking or decrypting the router may be utilized to gain access to such networks. And so Gonzalez used this technique to hack into networks of large retailers such as BJ's Wholesale Club and DSW. And so during this time, he stole around 400,000 credit card accounts, and he started living a super lavish lifestyle, spending money on cars. And there was even an anecdote of him spending upwards of $75,000 on a single birthday party. And so while things were seemingly going well for him, he wanted to further build out his operation. And so here you can just see some images of war driving related stuff. On the bottom right hand corner of the screen, there's equipment that somebody war driving might use. And then there's also a graphic in the middle that kind of helps illustrate the process. So wanting to essentially further his operations, what did he turn to? Well, after having success with war driving, Gonzalez did not like one thing. He did not like having to be physically close to the place he was hacking. And this is kind of for obvious reasons. It's probably you're less anonymous if you have to be there physically, and it just could lead to a greater chance that you get found out by authorities. So this led him to perfecting something known as SQL injections. And SQL injections, they allow hackers to inject malicious SQL code into an input field of a website. And now this can allow hackers to modify and view sensitive data contained within a database, among other things. And because the internet was just being built out, many websites were extremely vulnerable to SQL injections with little or no built-in safeguards. And he even noted himself that many of the times when he would access this data, the data wouldn't even be encrypted at all. And so Gonzalez used this technique to essentially create backdoors on corporate networks. And so after compromising a system using this technique, he would engage in ARP spoofing. And this would allow him to trick other computers into sending him sensitive information. And this general process can be seen in the central graphic. So there is a victim machine, which, inadvertently will send information to a hacker system thinking it's, a part of the network. And when the hacker machine receives that information, it may reroute it back back to its intended recipient just so it stays undetected. And so Gonzalez used this technique to intercept sensitive information such as payment data. And then by 2007, he and his small group of friends were able to compromise over 50 million credit cards accounts with this technique. And these breaches occurred at companies that you would know, Office Max, Target, and Barnes and Noble, among many others. And so this ends with where is Albert Gonzalez today? Well, shortly after engaging in these operations, an individual he had worked with when he was selling credit card information out, because he would his operations covered the entire globe. He would get a lot of this information would be on American consumers, and then he would essentially sell it to individuals across Europe. And so one Ukrainian person he worked with turned him into government officials. And as a result, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the damages associated with his actions are estimated to have cost around $200 million when it was all said and done. And so that is the story of Albert Gonzalez, government official turned infamous hacker. Thank you for listening.